So hi everyone, and hi my dear guest Ter Yang. Today I have a privilege, and I'm especially happy to interview my former classmate with whom we studied in France for our masters in applied ecology, who was also my neighbor in Poitiers. Please welcome Ter Yang. Today we are gonna talk about urban sustainability, so the sustainability in the cities. UN says that more than 70% of people will live in cities and conglomerates in 30 years, actually, by 2050. And so we thought it would be very interesting to unpack this topic and to explore sustainability in the city. Hi, Ter Yang. I'm very pleased and happy to have you here with me today.
Hello, Anna. Thank you for inviting me to this interview. It's my pleasure.
Would you brief us and tell us what you do now and where you started your path in sustainability since we graduated? What did you do probably for your master's project, and then how you slowly progressed to what you do now?
Okay, I'll try to keep this very concise. So I've always had a passion for nature and the environment since I was really, really young, which is why I did the master's in applied ecology review. Initially, like many nature people, my attention and my focus was on the natural environment and the plants and animals and the ecological interactions. But it was during the master's programs that I slowly started to realize that, hey, if I want to protect the environment, yes, attention and the study, attention paid to the natural environment and the study of the natural environment is important. But equally important, if not more important, is to study how people interact with the natural environment. So my master's thesis project was less so on the study of the natural environment, but more on the mechanisms, the conservation policies that people use to influence people to protect the environment. And the policy instrument that I'm talking about is PES, Payments for Ecosystem Services. So my project was very different from everyone else. Everyone else went into nature and looked at plants and animals and did very exciting things in very exotic places. But for me, I was talking to people, interviewing them, asking them, what they do for a living, what they do with the money that's given to them. So it felt more like a sociological project, which some of our classmates didn't quite understand, except for Fabiola, who also did a social-based kind of project. So after that experience, I realized, hey, conservation is really about how people interact, exploit, for lack of better word, and protect nature. And really, if we want to protect the natural environment, we really need to address people's needs and how their needs will be satisfied without over exploitation of the natural environment. So that's how my interest sort of swayed toward this angle. So after I graduated from the master's program, I did a job in the sustainability office of a university to get the students and staff of the university to be more sustainable and looking at how to get people to be more supportive of sustainable policies implemented in the university. So you can see that I've shifted towards urban sustainability. And right now, I work in the Center for Living Cities in Singapore. This is a knowledge center that aims to distill knowledge from cities from all over the world and also from Singapore, synthesize them into a easily digestible form, and share this knowledge with everyone on how to make cities more livable. Apart from this, I also volunteer for Nature Society Singapore, which is an NGO in Singapore that tries to protect, the nature areas that's left in Singapore. Not a lot of them, but still important to be conserved.
Which means you're the right person to talk about urban sustainability and sustainability in the city.
Okay, so I have to qualify this a bit. I'm not an urban planner by training, so I cannot say I'm an expert in urban development or urban planning. So, uh, but I can share with you my experiences living in Singapore as an ordinary citizen and infuse this with the lens of sustainability. And hopefully this will give your listeners some insights into how Singapore tries to maintain sustainability within its environment.
Right. I read somewhere that Singapore is called the Garden City. To get the terminology right, and you mentioned the NGO that you're volunteering for to preserve the remaining biodiversity in the city, the greenery. To get the terms right, what is urban sustainability? What qualifies, which city would qualify for sustainable?
Okay, so I'm sure you would have talked about this in your previous podcast. The term sustainability is a very nebulous term. I mean, there's no precise definition for it. It can mean different things to different people. For some people, sustainability is about the natural environment, how it's protected, how it's conserved. For some people, sustainability is about energy efficiency or renewable energy. For some people, sustainability is about prudent use of resources, how to how to use resources more efficient, like water, for example, and how to reduce pollution. So that's also sustainability. So if we are to think about this carefully, actually sustainability can mean anything and everything. So back to term urban sustainability, right? Which city or which town qualifies to be, a sustainable city or an eco city, to quote the term? If we are to use this term very strictly, uh, I think we have to admit that no city currently qualifies to be an eco city. But nonetheless, I think it's useful to retain this notion because it serves as an ideal, it serves as a mission for us. So even if we do not achieve 100% of what an ecocity is, 50% is still better than 0%. So at least it's target for us to aim for.
Mhm. Singapore, a country slash city, would you consider it sustainable? What are the traits of Singapore that makes it unique?
Um, okay, I think you already mentioned it. It's a city-state. And there are not many city-states in today's world. Maybe you can consider Monaco as a city-state, but really there's not many cities that are countries on their own. And is Singapore sustainable? I would say yes and no. And our sustainable story, I would say, started when we first became independent. But uh, we didn't think of it as sustainability back then. So I think I'll give you some examples. So I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with Singapore, but we 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 call ourselves an accidental country. We didn't want to be independent. We were actually originally part of Malaysia. We got kicked out and we were forced to be independent. The reason why we felt that we couldn't be independent because we are a very small country. Even as a city, we're not a very large city. We are a medium-sized city. To give you a sense of scale, we are smaller than the city of London. We are smaller, probably less than half the size of Beijing in China. So we're a very small place. So a small place like this, it is inconceivable that we can survive as an independent country because we have no water, no place to grow our own food. Our population is small. We don't really have enough manpower to defend ourselves. So we never thought we could be independent. But when we got kicked out, we had no choice. We had to survive. So back then, a lot of decisions aimed to ensure the survivability of Singapore. On hindsight, they're actually good for sustainability. So, for example, our water management. So, we try to maximize water collection within the island. So we have reservoirs which are man-made lakes to collect water. But apart from the reservoir, you need a water catchment area. So water catchment area is like an area where rainwater will be collected and it will be channeled to the reservoir. So a water catchment area it is important for it to be pollution free, because if it's dirty, then the water that goes in the reservoir will be very dirty. Then it will be very difficult to treat them to make them into drinkable water. So water catchment area, we had to ensure that it's clean and as big as possible. So right now, I think we are aiming for 2/3 of the country to be a water catchment area. So that means to make sure that almost the entire island is very clean and free from pollution, for the water to be collected to be pure and clean enough for treatment. So we did that because we don't have big natural rivers to collect water from. So we had to make use of every available bit of space in Singapore to aid in water collection. And that was really survival mode. Um, and even with that, we didn't have enough water. We have to import water from Malaysia. So that was so water management is one example. Another example is our pollution controls, which is related to water management. So um, in this small place, we have to use it not only for water collection, but we also needed to house people for residential areas. We needed to do business, so we have to set commercial areas, and then there's also industries. We needed to industrialize, so we need a place to have factories. So all these places crammed together, we have to make sure that pollution is kept under stringent control, because if not, then the place becomes unlivable, inhabitable. It's not as if we could dedicate one part of the country to have all these very polluted industries and let that part of the country go to waste, and then we move to another part of the country. We don't have that luxury. So right from the start, environmental protection, pollution control was a very high priority. So that was from a survival instinct. We don't have enough land. We need to protect our land. But on hindsight, all these pollution controls, they're actually good for sustainability, right? To reduce pollution is obviously protecting the environment in a very important way. Yeah. So when we first started, a lot of things that we did was really for survival, less so for sustainability. But over the years, when sustainability became an issue that people are talking about, and we look back at what we have done, yeah, yes, I think we did something good for the environment, and yes, in a way, we are sustainable. No, because I think we have a lot more room for improvement. I think we can do better. We can improve our recycling rates, for example. We can improve the attitudes of the population. If we compare ourselves with, let's say, the Japanese and Taiwanese, I don't think we are as environmentally conscious as them. So I think there is room for improvement here. Yeah.
So it started with the scarcity of resources and turned into more in just functionality. That because you don't have this land, you cannot afford what is it called, dumps. Because you don't have natural rivers, you came up with the water purification technology. Is it true that you desalinize your waters into potable water?
Yes, actually. So, okay. So I think every Singaporean school children actually know this story by now, because they actually teach this in school. So in Singapore, we have what we call the 4 national taps. So the first national tap will be the reservoirs, and the water catchment area, the reservoirs that we already have since independence. That's to collect as much rainwater as possible, but that is clearly insufficient. So the second national tap will be to import water from Malaysia. Uh, but there's a danger in that, because we are at the mercy of our neighbor to supply water. If for whatever reason they choose not to supply water to us, then we don't have enough water.
Right.
So that was always a a national security concern. So we had to come up with something that could potentially replace this second national tap. We needed to be self-sufficient in water, which was why we developed two more national taps. The third one was what we call new water, which is actually recycled water. So what happens with all the used water in Singapore is that they get collected in sewers and then they go to a treatment plant to be recycled, to be re-purified again into this ultra pure and clean water, which we call new water. The reason why we call it new water is because if you call it recycled water, there's a yuck factor associated with it, so people think it's disgusting. So we had new water, we call it new water. We got politicians, we got businessmen to drink this new water in public during national events to convince people, hey, this water is drinkable. So that's the third national tap. And the fourth national tap will be the desalination. So we taking seawater, we purify it to become potable water. This idea actually existed for decades. The reason why it was only done in recent years was simply because of cost. Back then, it was expensive to do this because the technology for this was very expensive back then. But now the cost of this technology has become more affordable, and therefore could do this on a more industrial scale. So these are four national taps, and hopefully, tap 1, 3, and 4 can replace tap 2. In the future, so that we don't have to be at the mercy of other countries to export water to us.
That's so smart. Talk to me about the green buildings. I read that green buildings have been mandatory since 2008. What does the green building mean, and what is the strategy of Singapore on that?
Okay, so green buildings, they are not a concept that is invented by Singapore. This is a concept that has already existed in Europe and in the US. They have their own standards for green buildings. So green buildings would refer to buildings that will have a lower environmental footprint as compared to conventional buildings. So that means they use energy and water more efficiently. The materials used to construct the buildings are more environmentally friendly, and also the construction process is also more environmentally friendly. And apart from that, the use of the buildings, the building operations, they also adhere to environmentally friendly practices. So this idea, it already existed overseas, right? We are not the first ones to think of it. But we realized that these standards that were invented in the US or in Europe, for example, LEEDS, they were really designed for temperate regions. So they may not be fully suitable for a tropical region. So that is why in Singapore, there's a government agency called the Building and Construction Authority. So it's a government agency. They have come up with their own green building standards, which we call the Green Mark building. So these building standards, they aim to make buildings in Singapore more efficient in terms of resource utilization and also in their operation. And more importantly, they are suited for tropical environment. So one difference I can share with you is between the standards overseas and the standards in Singapore, the green building standards for Singapore, the Green Mark standards, they place more emphasis on energy efficiency. Reason being, in Singapore, we use a lot of air conditioning because of the tropical climate. And air conditioning uses up more than half of all energy consumption in Singapore.
Impressive.
Meaning half the electricity generated in Singapore goes into air conditioning. So it's a huge chunk of resources being used just to reduce the temperature to make the place more comfortable. So a lot of the standards or the requirements of green buildings in Singapore addresses how air conditioning can be made more efficient, or how to actually reduce air conditioning in buildings without compromising comfort levels. So thermal comfort is a very significant portion of the green building standards in Singapore. and this is, we feel that this is important for a tropical city like us.
Right. Speaking of, the conventional term of eco-city suggests such a thing as a triple bottom line: environmental, economical, and social component to it. Singapore is quite unique in terms of the public housing policy. I know about the governmental program of 99 years lease. So this is clearly a social component. Can you tell me more about this program and how does it work? And a second part to this same question is how the social component is even ensured in city-state of Singapore.
Okay, so actually this is one very good example of a policy that started off as something to ensure the survivability of the country rather than the sustainability. When they first designed all these policies, they were really thinking of making sure that Singapore exists as a country, and less so about sustainability. And I can share with you this because this is a story that we've all learned in schools, and it's always part of public education campaigns. So Singaporeans are quite familiar with this. Okay, so it really started off when we first became independent. So if you do not already know, Singapore started off as a very poor, well, okay,
Village.
I would say very poor, but a poor third world country. So we had lots of problems, not enough water, not enough food, and also very importantly, not enough housing. So back then in 1965, the a significant portion of the population was staying in slums in the downtown area. So the slums were incredibly overcrowded, and sanitation was not satisfactory, and there were lots of diseases because of the lack of sanitation. So housing was an issue. So the first thing that the government did was, okay, we need to provide housing for the people, because without proper housing, you can forget about everything else. You can forget about education, you can forget about industries, you can forget about the economy, because people need a place to live. And because we are a small island, so straight away from the start, it was decided that high density living in the form of high-rise apartment blocks was the way to go. We cannot be a low-rise, less dense city that you find in the US, for example, right? A lot of people stay in nice bungalows and houses. So right from the start, we felt that this wouldn't work for us because we simply don't have the land. So, and because the bulk of the population was poor, so it was, very obvious that, that the government has to build subsidized public housing for the bulk of the population, and that these public housing estates must not repeat the public housing estates of other countries. Okay, so why do I say that? Because I know from speaking with my foreign friends that, when I tell people that I stay in a public housing estate, they give me this very surprised look, like, oh, but you don't look like one. And I was a bit puzzled because I didn't quite understand what they mean by that. And then I realized that in many countries around the world, public housing is synonymous with poor housing quality.
Right.
That it is housing meant for the poor, and the quality is substandard, crime rate is high, and there are lots of social ills and social problems in these housing estates. And that is totally not what I experienced. So what the Singapore government did back then was to make sure that these housing estates meant for the bulk of the population must be safe, secure, livable, and more important, pleasant homes, that people enjoy living in. So they made sure that the housing estates had enough schools, enough medical facilities, enough shops. They even tried to place housing estates near light industrial areas so that there were enough jobs nearby so that people didn't mind staying in housing estates. So from the start, it was a survival issue. It was never about sustainability. And over the years, as income levels rose in Singapore, people became more affluent. Then the government started to get Singaporeans to own their homes. So they said, okay, why don't you buy, the houses, that you're staying in? Because this gives people a sense of ownership. So and it's not difficult to understand this because if you own a place, you tend to take better care of it. And if you own a place, you tend to take better care of the surroundings of the property as well. So, and it gives people a stake in the country. It gives people a sense that they belong to this country, that they are stakeholders in this country. And this is important for a young country without a long history. You need to build a sense of nationhood, and public housing was a keystone of this nation building effort. Okay, so what does all this got to do with sustainability, and what does all this got to do with 99 years? Okay, so right from the start, the government realized that okay, public housing for the bulk of the population, we should get them to get a sense of ownership, but at the same time, we shouldn't be penalizing future generations. So yes, you can get the current generation to own all the property that they desire at a subsidized rate for the bulk of the population because they stay in public housing. But what about the future population? If you sell all your land, use up all your land to cater to the needs of the current generation, then the future generation, they actually do not have much land for them, to build new apartment blocks. They will find it very difficult to own property, and they may feel disenfranchised. They may feel hopeless. So the 99-year lease was put in place so that future generations will still have a steady supply of land for housing and other commercial industrial needs. So that's the purpose of the 99-year lease.
How smart. I cannot think of a better example than Singapore. Now that I'm thinking how many countries we've traveled during our master's program. You have extensively traveled in Europe besides the master's program. Your master's thesis, you did it in Latin America. You mentioned everyone went to some exotic destination,
Yes.
but you too, you were one of them. Are there any cities? I know you mentioned in the beginning that you don't know, what kind of city would be rightfully called an eco-city. But are there any examples in the world that you might remember of that would count as a sustainable city, as smart as Singapore?
So different cities have strengths in different areas. So I can provide some examples from other cities, which I think Singapore can learn from actually.
Mm-hmm.
So one prime example would be Copenhagen, because Copenhagen is known to be a very bicycle-friendly city. I mean, if you go to Copenhagen, bike lanes are everywhere. You see lots of people cycling, and the traffic is very friendly towards cyclists, so you don't feel dangerous cycling on the road because everything's so well organized, and cyclists are respected as legitimate road users, which sadly is not so much the case in Singapore because we don't have that many cycling lanes on the roads yet. We do have cycling lanes connecting different parks, but people find that as a last mile connection to public transport, these park connectors are not that convenient because they connect parks, they don't connect to transport modes. Whereas in Copenhagen, it is a very bicycle-friendly city, and I'm sure you would have read research on the benefits of a bike-friendly city. Not only does it reduce carbon emissions, it also
It stresses me.
Yeah. So I think this one area that Singapore is working towards, and I hope one fine day will be as bike friendly as Copenhagen. So that's one example. Another example is in the form of waste reduction, in how people throw waste and how people recycle. One example I can think of is Taipei in Taiwan.
Mhm.
So they have this very effective system, which I'm very impressed with. So in Taipei, you need to throw your rubbish in designated rubbish bags, which you need to buy from the municipal agency or the municipal office. If you throw your rubbish in any other bag, the garbage truck will not accept. So you have to pay money to the municipal authorities to buy a specific garbage bag, throw your rubbish in, and then when the rubbish truck comes, you bring it to the rubbish truck to throw away your rubbish. Uh, at the same time, you can collect free bags to put in stuff for recycling.
Mhm.
So if you have like paper to recycle or clean plastic to recycle, you can collect free bags from the municipal office and you can give it to the truck when it comes to collect. So what this does is it incentivizes people to
Mhm.
throw away as little rubbish as possible because you don't want to spend too much money buying bags to throw your rubbish.
Right.
So, of course, I read, from articles that when this system was first implemented, there was a lot of backlash, because back then these bags were free. You didn't have to pay for it, and if you get people to start paying for something which was originally free, obviously people are going to protest. They say, it's going to make the cost of living higher. This is not fair. This is profiteering. The municipal office not doing your job. But then they realized that after they switch over this new system, they end up paying less money for waste management because back then the waste management fee, if I remember it correctly, it was a flat fee. So it doesn't matter how much rubbish you throw away, you pay a standard fee
Mhm.
across, right? But now the garbage management fee is dependent on how many plastic bags you buy to throw away your rubbish. So you can actually control the volume of your waste. And because people control, they realize that some of them at least end up paying less for their waste disposal.
Right.
So I thought this was a remarkable system, which frankly speaking, is a little bit difficult to implement in Singapore because we don't bring our bags to the truck. We throw our bags into a rubbish chute in our apartment. So it's like this
Mhm.
hole in the wall where you throw rubbish inside and the bag will just drop to the ground level.
We used
So
to
this
have it here
convenience,
too in
yeah, so this
Ukraine.
convenience makes it difficult to implement the system in Taipei. But it's something that's impressive and it's a good role model for other cities to follow.
That inevitably leads me to the next question. The policy, the governmental policy, how strong the institutions are in Singapore, in Taiwan, to to impose, to suggest these things and to control them. Because in Ukraine we have a new law on waste management, if I'm not mistaken, since 1st of January 2018 or 19. I might be losing track of time here, but we are supposed to sort our trash and to also recycle it in different recycle, reduce, and so on. But this is just not happening. There is only one waste truck taking everything, plastic together with paper, together with glass. So it just doesn't work. How strong and which institution is maybe responsible for what urban planning? Because it's not just about waste. It's the integral system. It's all together. Is it the ministry?
Okay. So, so the Singapore system is like this. We have a Ministry of National Development. So they look at issues of development issues in Singapore. But under them, they have this authority called the URA, the Urban Redevelopment Renewal Authority. So they look at urban planning issues in Singapore. So they are really the urban planners. There's another authority known as the National Environment Agency. So they are the ones that are in charge of like pollution controls, waste management. And then we have a public utilities board that's in charge of water issues. So there are different government agencies looking at specific sectors of city management. So are they strong? From a policy view, I think as an ordinary citizen, yeah, they're quite efficient. Uh, and I think the main reason being because our government can plan long term.
Mhm.
So if your listeners do not already know, we've had the same party in power for the past 55 years, and for the foreseeable future, I think you'll still be the same party. So for to a Westerner, who is used to liberal democratic party politics, this may sound like an awful thing, but from a planning point of view, it's good because the party can have long-term vision, so they can plan for the next 50 years, or they can plan for the
And
next
stick to
100
it.
years. So they can start simple, small steps now that will accumulate into big, differences in the future. And because you're in power for so long, you know that your policies are going to be implemented, they can be executed. So you have the confidence to execute long-term projects and not worry about being kicked out in the next general election, for example. So I think that's one strength of the Singapore government. And also, generally, I think Singaporeans are quite law-abiding. So if there's any law that is put into place, we generally follow the law. We do. It's quite rarely that people willfully break the policies or break the law, because we know that the government is very good at implementing and enforcing laws. Punishments can be quite severe if people break the law. But other than that, if you follow the rules and regulations, you're fine, right? So in that sense, uh, uh, the governance is strong. But on the other hand, there are certain issues that the government choose not to use laws and regulations to control, right? They prefer to do it via the means of public education, public campaigns, So these areas, the effectiveness of public education and public campaigns in changing behavior is a mixed picture in Singapore. Some of them are not very effective. So, for example, the use of single-use plastic bags from supermarkets. For the longest time, there are environmentalists, in Singapore urging, for the government to make it a mandatory, to charge the use of single-use plastics. And you see this in different countries, right? You see this in the UK, you see this in Germany, and it has been
Georgia.
proven that, yeah, and it has been proven that with this charge in place, the use of plastic bags has reduced dramatically. So people have been arguing that we should do the same in Singapore. But in this area, the government has decided no, we shouldn't impose a law. We should get people to voluntarily reduce the use of plastic bags. We should treat this we should do this through education. We should do this through public campaigns. To try to change people's behavior. And the results are not very obvious. Still, we don't see a huge reduction in the use of plastic bags. So uh, there's a lot more work to do in this aspect. So this is just one example.
Yeah. So democracy doesn't really work in this case.
I will say that. I think. Okay. So when people say the word democracy, so people use the word democracy so often that I have a sense that people don't understand what this word means, right? I mean, if you look at the word democracy, what it really means is having a group of people decide on something, right? If you get a group of people to vote on something and collectively reach a decision, that's a democratic process, right? But if you look at how democracy is practiced in different countries, it's always merged with a certain set of social values that will interact with this democracy, right? For example, in the US, I would think it's individual rights, personal freedom. That's very important. So they merge this with democracy. So in the US, you cannot force people to vote, right? Because it's their personal freedom to choose whether they want to go to the voting station or not. It's their personal choice, it's their personal right. You cannot force that. But in Singapore, we do that. It is compulsory for people to go vote. If not, you'll be taken off the register roll. So if you want to vote the next time, it's a troublesome process to get yourself registered again.
I heard the same about Belgium. You get a fine if you don't go vote, and they really check it.
Yeah. So different countries have different kinds of democracy, and that depends on the social values of that particular society. Right? For example, Singapore's brand of democracy to others will seem very, very unpalatable. For example, we force people to go to vote, which to an American, he or she may think, oh, this is awful. How can you force people to vote? It's their personal choice. And also, in Singapore, we try to protect minority rights. So we have this thing called the group representative constituency. So you don't vote for individuals, you vote for a group of individuals to govern a particular constituency. So even if you don't like a particular person in that group, but as long as you vote for that group to enter parliament, and the whole group, including the person that you may not like, will have to enter parliament. Mm-hmm. So for some people, this is not true democracy because you're not really choosing the people you want. You're forced to choose a package that contains elements that you don't like, right? But the official narrative here is this, the reason why they do this is because in that group, the ethnic composition of that group of parliamentarians reflects the ethnic composition of the entire population. So the idea is to ensure that there are enough minorities in parliament. That's the official narrative. Because the assumption is the majority will not likely to vote for any minorities to get into government. So you need to protect minorities. You need to make sure that you have a group, and that group must have some minorities inside, so that they will be they will get a chance to enter parliament to represent the population. So that's the official narrative. So it may not be very palatable to other people in other countries, but this is how we work. So democracy, we have it, but in a different form that other people may not understand or may not agree with.
I could hear notes of inclusivity and diversity. The question that I asked you about the social component, how to make a city socially inclusive, diverse, and connected. What are your thoughts?
So
the parliament you already have, yes. The policy you already have, so there is already something established, which is great. But what else?
So I would have to refer back to the housing policy again, the public housing estates. There is one policy that, again, was implemented for survival considerations, less so for inclusivity. It wasn't in people's mind back then. We have this thing called ethnic quota policy in our public housing estates. That means every housing estate, every housing apartment block will have an ethnic quota. Mm-hmm. So, for example, so this ethnic quota mirrors the ethnic composition of the entire population. So, for example, if this apartment block has too many Chinese, for example, then no new Chinese families can move into this block. It must be a Malay family or an Indian family. Conversely, if there are too many Indian families in this block, then no new Indian families can move in. Only only Chinese families or Malay families can move in. So the reason for this is we want to maintain ethnic integration in our public housing estates. And ethnic integration is our way of ensuring cordial and peaceful inter-ethnic relations, because the experience of many other countries show that inter-ethnic relations quite often can become quite uh, violent or quite antagonistic. So we do not want this to happen again. The reason why I say again is because Singapore used to experience racial riots, and that was an unpleasant episode. The Malays and Chinese were eating each other, were trying to kill each other. So we didn't want history to repeat itself. So therefore, we said, okay, we should get the races to mix with one another. And if your neighbors are of a different ethnicity, you will live with them, you will grow up with them, your children will play with them, you will understand them better, and you hopefully it will promote mutual understanding and mutual tolerance and ideally mutual love and protection. Yeah.
So no ghettos.
So that's from a survival perspective. But of course, when you look back and think about inclusivity, yes, this is very inclusive because you make sure the minorities are not constrained in ghettos and isolated from the rest of the society. So from an inclusivity perspective, yes, this is a good thing to have.
The concept of the eco-city and sustainable city sounds to me, especially after talking to you, as a very complex, fun, and integral thing to work with. Let's say you are a mayor of city X. We don't know which city. Imagine. Which people from which backgrounds, professions would you put together to design a sustainable city?
So you need different professionals from different sectors. Obviously, you need urban planners, you need real estate professionals who knows how to manage the real estate market, because we've seen in many cities that has real estate markets that have gone really crazy and made properties very, very unaffordable. Hong Kong is the classic case study. Then you need scientists who knows how to make sure that the city is climate resilient. I think this is a very important thing to have nowadays, because I think climate change is inevitable. So you need scientists to know how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So I think it's very important. You also need sociologists, because you need to understand how people interact with the places they live in, they work in. So how do you create a city that is livable, habitable? So you need sociologists, you need economists, because you need to know how to manage the economics of the city, how to promote businesses, how to attract investments. Basically, you need all sorts of professions in managing the city. And but most importantly, you must have people who are able to have a strategic planning perspective. They must be able to think long term. They must be able to think of strategic ways to achieve long-term objectives, because short-term planning can only do so much. It doesn't addresses various environmental issues that are typically very long-term, for example, climate change.
Right. And yeah, vision, long-term vision and strategy, and preferably the people that, I heard it somewhere, sadly, about Ukraine. People that come to power for 4 years are not coming to change anything. They're coming to leave with more money in 4 years. And if you manage to build as a country, as a young country, manage to build a system where it's not the case, where it's the where the place is for people and made by people. That's a truly inspiring and amazing example. Probably one last question, because I know I'm keeping you late for too long. Climate change and the climate resilient city. We've heard news about Amazon rainforest burning, Australia being hit by fires, then floods, now snow. Are there any specific challenges that Singapore faces? And if so, how do
Yes,
you tackle them?
definitely. So, firstly, it's the rise in temperatures. So, the Singapore is getting a hotter place to live in. So, this is especially a big problem because we're in the tropics. We are already hot to begin with.
Mm.
So, if the temperature rises again, then quite quite likely we may become unbearably hot to live in. So that's a possibility. Another big challenge that we have would be sea level rise. I mean, we are a low-lying island. So if the sea level is to rise by 1 meter, a lot of our low-lying areas in Singapore will be flooded and submerged. So these are the few key challenges that we face in Singapore for the long term. Yes.
Mhm. And is there anything happening already, like against sea levels rising? What is going
So
on?
as I think it's incredibly good timing that I'm talking to you right now because just yesterday the government announced long-term plans to combat climate change. So the government has pledged to reduce our carbon emissions by half by 2030, and they are aiming to achieve net zero carbon emissions by the second half of the century. So this is long-term plans. And so to achieve this, they have announced various plans, various strategies to achieve this and they range from power generation, how to make our power generators more energy efficient, and how to adopt more low carbon technologies. They're also looking at making sure that our industries achieve more energy efficient solutions. Then there's also transport. We're trying to, I think the government announced that by 2040, we should replace all our conventional internal combustion engines in vehicles to be more environmentally friendly ones. Then there's also buildings, households, waste and water management systems that they're trying to change gradually to achieve this net zero carbon emission. So these are long-term plans. And then also there are like adaptation policies, strategies that they've announced, like building coastal defenses, and they have pledged, I think, $100 billion to be spent in the next 100 years. And I think in the budget announcement just a few weeks ago, they will first pump in $5 billion to kickstart this coastal defense work, I think. Yeah.
Right.
So lots of new announcements coming up, and I expect to see more such announcements and more details going forward regarding climate change adaptation and mitigation in Singapore.
Strategies.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you very much for talking to me today. I learned a lot of new things, and personally, my takeaway, if I am to wrap it up in one phrase and one, kind of a motto sentence, that would be: you want an urban resilience, sustainable city, think long term, because that came
Yes.
up many times during the interview.
Yes.
Thinking long term and committing to the strategy and to the plan.
And also scenario planning, because you need to predict. Of course, prediction is always a difficult thing to do, but you need to have people who plan different scenarios and devise strategies and policies to deal with different scenarios, so that when a particular scenario does happen in future, you already have policies already designed to address this scenario.
No one likes to do that.
And this is particularly important for emergencies or crisis management. This is
Yeah.
particularly important for that. Yeah.
Risk management is the least preferred topic and subject of governments. But the
But
time we live in.
yes, but it's important because I know, when it's peaceful and everything's going well, if you spend money on doing these things, people would think, oh, why are you wasting money? Why are you devoting resources to something that is not likely to happen? But you need to be prepared. Okay, so the prime example right now I can think of is the coronavirus epidemic right now. So in other countries, in other cities, in other regions, there's a mad rush to buy masks, to buy sanitation chemicals, to buy
Right.
thermal scanners, thermometers, by the city officials or by the government. Uh, there is less of a rush in Singapore to do this. Why? Because our government has already stockpiled masks in previous years in preparation for an outbreak like this. They have already bought all the necessary thermal scanners. They've already stockpiled the necessary chemical sanitation and disinfectant chemicals, so to be channeled to the public hospitals when such an outbreak occurs. So there's already a stockpile that was accumulated when there was no outbreak. Therefore, when the outbreak occurs and there's a lack of supply, it didn't really affect the Singapore government that much because they've already bought it.
I must say
But
I'm
now,
beyond impressed.
but now they're starting to trying to buy more because they see that the stockpile, the supply that they have stocked is decreasing, and they want to buy more before the stockpile gets depleted. So that's what the government is doing, trying to do right now.
I
So
love this philosophy.
so preparation is key, but to do this, the government or the city officials, they need to have the trust of the city population. The city population must trust that the city officials are spending money wisely, that they are not corrupt, they are doing things that are of a certain use. It may not be apparent right now, but it may prove its value in future. So there must be that level of trust also.
Right. Well, there is a lot of food for thought, and I'm trying to think in my head to wrap up this conversation, the components of a green city. But I think we went beyond green city or sustainable city to a more philosophical, long-term planning of life,
Well, actually,
regardless of where you are.
if you notice, what I've shared with you is actually more about governance, right?
Yes.
And governance is not just about sustainability. It's actually about survival. It's actually about everything, right? So to me, uh, actually, we shouldn't be so pigeonholed onto sustainability. To me, the best forms of sustainability, of course, you may disagree with me, but I sincerely think that the best way to do sustainability is such that it is achieved as an inevitable byproduct of something else. So, for example, uh, the waste management in Taipei, for example, people choose to reduce their waste. Uh, I think primarily because they want to save money, not because of environmental reasons. But it's totally fine because when they are trying to save money, the inevitable byproduct is they produce less waste, which is good for the environment. So if we can design sustainability policies in such a way that they are actually an inevitable byproduct of something else that people are more interested in or more concerned about, I think this is the best and most natural way of doing sustainability.
Right. On this positive note, I thank you again for your time, for sharing your wisdom. I am never tired to say that you're one of the smartest people that I know. And I
Oh,
say
no.
it's true. I say it honestly. Thanks very much again. Have a good rest of the day. I guess there is not much left for today in Singapore. It was very cool talking to you today, and it was great to touch base again.
Well, it was my pleasure talking to you as well.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.